Oops. Welcome, everybody, to the Flameless Fireside podcast. We are super excited to have you here with us tonight. We've got a great couple topics to cover that we've been doing some research and gathering lots of good information to share with you. I am Celeste. I am your host for tonight, and I am here with Corey Hebert and Joyce Rigsby. Sorry, a little bit of a stumble there, but we are super excited to be here. So tonight we're going to kind of talk about a couple of different topics. We're going to start out talking about prenuptial agreements, pros and cons. I know that's a huge kind of touchy spot in the singles world. So, get into the chat, say your piece, see what you want to share with everybody. But it's going to be interesting. See what we come up with that. Once we get done with prenuptial agreements, we're going to talk about just recovering financially from a divorce. And I think we all know that none of us planned on probably coming to our marriage coming to an end and having to deal with the financial burdens that come with either paying child support or receiving child support that may not help as much as we would have wanted, or not having an education to pick up where the other spouse may have gained the experience and education. There's so much into it. So finances is huge. Trying to recover from that and get back on a good path is always important. We're hopeful that some of these tips that we have for you tonight will be beneficial. Please keep in mind, and I was thinking about this as I've been preparing for this topic, that it's kind of like when my clients come to me for dating advice or relationship advice or even life advice with their business or whatever, the things I have to offer aren't just like, wow, I've never even thought of that before. Like, it's not like it's, wow, that's like unbelievable that you just shared that with me. But what it is it's sound advice. It's advice or just information that is solid, that it's reliable, that it works. But what it is, I think sometimes if there's not someone there to kind of be accountable to you, you might not do it. So a lot of the stuff we have to share, you're going to be like, okay, I've heard this. Okay, I've heard this. But the question is, are you doing it? And are you doing all of it? Right? So that's where it comes as we share this information, as we share what we have gathered with you. The important part is that you have to institute. And I know that sounds hard, but it just is what it is. So nothing, mind-blowing, but definitely solid information that can help you get back on track and move forward, or help you decide if you want a prenuptial agreement or not. So what we're going to do, we're going to start out with prenups. And we're going to have Joyce kind of take over that. And then when we're done with prenups, we'll go into the financial side of this. So did you have something to say?
I'll preface something really quick. Like none of it, I'm not speaking for Joyce, I don't know, but I'm not a CPA. I'm not a financial planner. But I do have an MBA. I have bought and sold several properties. I've owned a business and sold a business successfully. So, and I've gotten the divorce in the process of having a business, having two properties, and having retirement plans and 401ks. And so I've been through, so we're going to be speaking from like experience of what we went through. And so I mean, even though I'm not a CPA or anything like that, I mean, I do have an MBA, so I have done a lot of finance stuff in my life. So, but yeah, just wanted to kind of preface that before anybody takes our advice and says, you gave me bad advice.
And disclaimer, I'm going to be upfront. We had options to bring on professionals. I thought that what we should do was kind of go solid, basic, foundational information, and then each of you can take that to a professional if you want to. And that would be on your plate to do so. So we opted for just the basics, the strong things that you can build upon, that can help move you forward. So that's what we've done. Yes, none of us are accountants, I don't believe, so, or attorneys or anything else that goes along with this. But what we had to share is definitely quality information. And if utilized, if instituted in your life, it would be a huge benefit. So we're going to start with prenups. All right. Okay. Before we get into that, though, Corey, are you going to want a prenup?
Yes.
All right. Joyce, are you going to want a prenup?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. See, there you go. I'm going to be honest. When I went into the dating scene early on, since I was coming out of an untrusting situation where trust had been lost, I was like, I will not get married unless I trust that person. And if I trust that person, then I don't need a prenup.
Yeah.
So I have
Well,
changed my thought on that, but it was interesting
yeah.
how over the journey my opinions did change on the topic. So
Well,
Well,
I
and
was going to explain my reasoning. I just want to just blurt that out because people are like, "Oh, he's a jerk." But I did sell a house in California before I moved to DC, and then before I came to Phoenix. And the way the economy is and the housing market is right now, I'm just sitting on that money. And so if I was to get remarried, I wouldn't want somebody to come in and be like, after 6 months, they're like, yeah, this isn't working out, to say, well, now I get half of your money when I brought that money into the relationship. So I wouldn't want there to be a misunderstanding and then pay attorneys to fight for something that legally is still mine by the law, but we spent it all on attorneys because the person was unreasonable. So I would just be like, let's hash this out in an agreement. The chances of a second marriage, we talked about this the last time, the chances of a second marriage divorce is like 80%.
yeah.
So why would zero people, I mean, there should be zero people that would say, I'm going to go into a relationship without a prenup, because if it's an 80% chance that it can go bust, why not at least get some stuff written down on paper? At least just saying, hey, the assets I had before are mine. The assets you had before are yours. And then anything we acquired after we got married, it's it,
All right. Well, we'll see. Joyce has done a lot of research on this, and she's going to share it with us. And she's got some pointers to point out.
So I'll start by sort of sharing this little statistics here. The percentage of couples with a prenuptial agreement has increased from 3% in 2010 to 15% in 2022. So that's a pretty big jump.
Wow.
And so I think it's important to know it's a topic that people are talking about. And
I have to wonder, are those the first year? I mean, first time marriages, I can see it being that low. I wonder what multiple marriage would be.
It's a good question. Higher. Probably more. Actually, another interesting statistic, and again, this is from a study that was done, and I don't know all of the ins and outs of the study, but the study found that 44% of singles believe it's a good idea to get a prenuptial agreement. And I will go into this discussion saying I very much think a prenuptial agreement is a good idea, but people have very different points of view on it. And I think that it's important to talk about it. And I was very thoughtful about, okay, I want to understand why people would not want to get a prenup. I want to understand that, because I think that it feels a little bit like the conversation is, well, I have something and I don't want you to have it. And I just don't think that that's what it's really all about. And so I think that this is a great topic, because I think there's something that we can all learn about, what is a prenup? What is it for? What does it do? What does it not do? But I think there's a quote that over and over again, I saw things in the research that said something along these lines. Prenuptial agreements can protect both spouses regardless of their earnings during the marriage. They can also strengthen a marriage if discussed openly. And so I think that there's this sentiment that, a prenuptial agreement is going to be the opposite of that it's going to destroy something. If you talk about these things, it's going to destroy it. But but one thing I will say is, so completely in a different context, but I was seeing a therapist once when I was engaged, and we were talking about some things that came to light that needed to be talked about. And I said, I don't want to talk about these things. This is so hard to talk about. And what he said to me, which I have tried to carry in many ways in my life, is sometimes the most important things to talk about are the things you're most uncomfortable talking about.
Oh my gosh. Amen. In general, in relationships, in life, in everything.
Yeah.
Like, I think
we talked about this a few weeks ago, like telling people bad news. Like, I don't think it's going to work out. It's the hardest conversation to have,
Yeah.
I think it's awkward.
Yeah.
And it's very, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I was just gonna say, it's so essential. And so I think that is, for me, as I've studied this and as I've thought about it for myself, I think the most essential thing is that it is an awkward conversation, but that is a good reason to have it. I think
the best reason, because, okay, what's the conversation going to be like if you're getting a divorce? and you're
Right.
discussing it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's going to
Yeah.
be more awkward. So,
Yep.
you know,
Agreed. Agreed.
and the truth is, you know, and I was looking at Jeff's or Jason's comment here, like, again, back to this trust thing. If you trust that person and you're like, I want to spend my life with you and eternity in our faith with you, then trust them enough to have the conversation. They won't get offended
Right.
if you have that type of a strong foundation to get into a marriage. If they're offended and they don't want to be married to you anymore, then you know that that's probably not the marriage you want anyway. But I honestly believe that if you have the trust, that's when these things can be spoken of and say, hey, you know, gosh, I lost a 25-year marriage. Corey, yours was how long? 26?
22 years.
Yeah. So it's not like we planned that, right? And
Right.
so again, statistics with multiple marriages are much lower. And it's like, okay, I do trust you, but I also have to keep my wits about me, right?
Yep. Well, and I think that sort of the idea of trust, I think that I understand that, but I think that there's more going on than just two people getting married. Sometimes it is like there's one of the resources I looked at said, here's a number of reasons why you should absolutely do a prenup. One of them is if you have children from a previous marriage, so that, you know, that you can both be very open about what happens, how they're cared for. So there's a lot of things, but there's a couple of, there's a great article here and it talked about some assumptions, and I want to address these because I think it hits a couple of really important points. So the first one here, we make this assumption about prenups that if I talk about this, I'll seem money hungry or stingy if I bring it up. But the truth really is this, that leading this conversation with love can actually strengthen a relationship.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've felt as I've kind of read some of the articles on this is that, again, going back to this idea that if you are afraid to talk about it, you absolutely should talk about it. And I think that the issue here in many relationships is that people, they don't want to sort of talk about these assumptions, but if you don't talk about them, they're only going to create more problems later. And the idea of sitting down and having a really good conversation with your significant other, with your soon-to-be spouse, whether you actually have a prenuptial agreement or not, you need to have that conversation. So, you know, I'm not going to go and tell every person that they absolutely should have a prenup, but I am saying you absolutely need to have a deep conversation about finances.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I think Jason,
absolutely.
Yeah, Jason, I think, was referring to like a trust, like a living trust.
Oh, do you have a trust?
But I don't.
Sorry,
so
Jason.
So to answer Jason's question, that is a very tough legal question.
Yep.
If you had a trust prior to the marriage, I think that's like having a prior asset. But I don't think that after you're married, you can throw things into the trust to protect it. To protect those assets that you acquire together, but that's something you'd have to talk to an attorney. But yeah, I mean, it might be smart to set up a trust that's prior to getting married of all the assets that you had prior. But then, what happens if you pierce that trust to, like, say, buy a property together or to pay for college or something? Piercing that trust, could that then put you in a legal jeopardy if you get a divorce? So
yeah, well, it's funny that we both jumped to that, because actually the second assumption here, it kind of comes down to the reason we jumped to that conclusion. The assumption is marriage is about love and romance, period. Like, that's all it's about. And so the idea of having those conversations about money, because we make this assumption that it's always about money. And I think that that's an important thing for us to really talk about. But the truth behind that is, I think, something really important to talk about. Marriage is an emotional and a financial partnership.
Exactly.
I think it's, we'd like to think it's that love trumps all things. And, we can, if we love each other enough, we can get through anything. But this is a financial partnership. And if you haven't talked about what you bring into that partnership, I mean, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't go into business unless I was very, very clear on somebody's financial situation, their debt, their assets. And I think the same is true of marriage. And I think we need to look at it that way. I think if we wear those rose-colored glasses that say, well, but I love him so much and I trust him, that he may be very trustworthy, but that's not a good enough reason.
People change. I mean, people change. People do weird things when it comes to money. Like there's the old saying that, that people own things until the things end up owning them. So what happens is that you're like, hey, everything's great, but then we bought boats and motorhomes and houseboats and all kinds of stuff, and then you're massively in debt, and then the debt creates a financial or a relationship strain, and then you guys part ways. But now both parties are stuck with massive amounts of debt and just all kinds of headaches. So you can't just say, oh, love conquers all. It is, like Joyce said, it's like starting a business. If you go into business with somebody, you have to have a partnership agreement. And that partnership agreement spells out, like, what are the percentages ownership, who's bringing in what money. So if I'm bringing all the money in and that other person's bringing sweat equity, then we have to agree how much value that brings. Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? You have to have all that ironed out. And then what happens if somebody dies in the partnership? I mean, you have to have that ironed out, because then spouses and kids start showing up and going, well, now I'm the owner. I inherited it. And then you got new business partners you didn't plan on. You have to have all of this stuff ironed out. And a prenup could do that. Like, what happens if we get divorced? What happens if you die? Like, do your kids and my kids fight over the money? What happens if we both die? Now we got two different sets of kids from different marriages fighting over the assets. A prenup is not about like, this is mine and this is yours, and everybody gets offended when you say prenup. You have to iron out merging of families. You're merging two different families into one. What happens when there's an inheritance question?
Well, even in a prenup, you can even have this needs to happen during the marriage part of the prenup. Like, it's not just about, post-divorce. This is like, you're saying, it can be all inclusive. It can even include pets, on what happens to pets and stuff.
Who takes care of the dog,
wills and stuff, and as well, you can do wills and other types of things, but a prenup can be used for beyond just, at the divorce.
Absolutely.
What? So,
and it's not just about money, but this quote here, very few couples have difficult conversations they really should have before they get married, which leads to more problems later. And then sort of the next part, having these uncomfortable conversations increases trust between future spouses and improves communication. And this is the author saying it, that I believe leads to more successful relationships and fewer divorces. Yeah. So the idea that a prenup is setting you up to go into a relationship that, expecting a divorce, I think is absolutely wrong. I think if we're going into the conversation about our finances, it is going to increase our success. We hear all the time, finances is one of the leading causes of divorce, or the leading, reason for discord in a divorce. And so if you start out that relationship, having had some conversations about how you both feel about money, how you've approached it up until the point that you're married, what the disposition that you want for the things that you have, you already understand each other better. But the next assumption, which I think kind of gets to some of what Celeste was saying, we make this assumption that only rich people need prenups. And I heard someone say recently that, people who have money want prenups, people who don't think they shouldn't have them. And I think that shouldn't be the case. Maybe that is the case, but it shouldn't be the case. Partly because, the courts, when they're faced with a prenuptial agreement, if it is unfairly written by one party, it will probably be thrown out.
Exactly.
If it overly favors one party, especially if that party is the writer, the one who sort of presented it to the other. And so the idea that someone who's rich needs are the only ones who need a prenup is not really true. And the truth is that there are countless other circumstances. One of the things that I've thought about in terms of sort of those differences is that I think people who are the ones who are making less or have less, they have an opportunity to say what their expectation is. One of the examples that I think is really great, like you said, Celeste, someone who is going to be a stay-home mom. Like if you have children together, she's going to be a stay-home mom, and you recognize that because she's doing that, she's entitled to half of what, I mean, there are things you can write into that agreement that say, we understand and agree that this is how we'll handle those financial situations.
Exactly. I think
it's just like a business. Like I said, it's like a business. You have to write all your contingencies in there. Like what happens if a partner dies? What happens if we break up this partnership? Who buys out who? At what value are you gonna buy out the business partner? Like you have to have all that. And so with a prenup, it's actually, think of it this way. If I told you, give me all the money you have and I'll invest it, but there's a 60% chance you'll lose it all. What would you invest in me? Would you give me your money to invest if you knew that there was a 60% chance that you were going to lose that money? Well, that's what a divorce does. So if I told you that you had a 60% chance of getting a divorce, and if you're married your second marriage has an 80%. So if I told you, give me your $50,000, but there's an 80% chance you're going to lose that $50,000, you would not give it to me.
Yeah. And
so why not go into the marriage and say, look, guys, there's an 80% chance that we might get a divorce. So let's iron all these things out now.
Right. And I think, and we're not looking at this as like doomsdayers, right? We're not like, oh, well, the odds are we're going to get married. No, what it is, it's just kind of setting the tone. You want to be safe. I want to feel safe. We both want to feel comfortable here. And honestly, if you're the one coming into a marriage and you don't have anything to offer, sometimes the prenuptial agreements actually cover you and say, I know you didn't bring anything, but the value you had during the marriage, awards you this much money, like what Joyce was saying, a stay-at-home mom who is not necessarily earning an income, but dang it, she's working her butt off. I can vouch for that. So there is value there, and the prenuptial can actually protect the one who isn't bringing in anything. So,
well, I see some people say that they don't like prenups, and I think it just has a dirty word, because the only time you ever hear about prenups is that some rich guy married some poor girl, got her to sign a prenup, and then he cheated on her, and then kicks her to the curb, and she's like, "Wow, I took care of his kids for 6 years. I didn't bring anything into. I didn't get to work. I didn't get to save money. I have no savings account. And he just kicked me to the curb after cheating on me." And so I think that it just gets a bad connotation. But like you said, Celeste, like it protects the person who's maybe the weakest in the relationship.
Exactly.
Maybe they're coming in with no education, no career, and they're like, I still have small children I have to take care of. And so that person should be saying, yeah, I want a prenup, because if you kick me to the curb after you go out and make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and invest in properties, what am I stuck with? I'm back to living in a 1-bedroom apartment with my 2 kids.
Exactly. It goes both ways. And I think those who say they don't like them is probably that trust issue. If I feel like I need to do a prenup, then I'm not committed to this marriage. And there's nothing even farther from the truth. That's not true. The truth is, we put our worries to rest at the beginning. We know, hey, this is what our plan is moving forward. We got a plan. We got a goal. Right. If things go awry, like someone passes away, or heaven forbid a divorce does come about, because guess what? Odds are, then we already have planned. It's already figured out. And as long as it's not like what Joyce is saying, unfair, completely unfair in one way or another, it usually upholds and upholds the law. Like they'll uphold it in your state for the most part. So
I'll give you an interesting example. I'll give you a interesting story. So my ex got remarried, and the person she remarried, she was telling me the story that happened to him. Like his first wife died. He got married to a second woman. He had all this money from like the death of his first wife, and sold the house. And so he had all this money in the bank. He moved in with the second wife, and she convinced him that she needed that let's remodel the house. So he used that money that he brought into the marriage to remodel the house. After 9 months of marriage, and after the house was remodeled, she divorced him. How does he get his money back out of the house?
He doesn't.
So when you guys say, oh, we don't need a prenup because we just got to pre-talk about it beforehand, he talked about it beforehand, and he never thought that she would have suckered him in remodeling her house with his money and then divorcing him. And then what she was able to say was, I brought this house into the marriage.
Yeah.
It was my premarital asset, and he got screwed.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about, and sort of, there's a number of reasons that people say they don't think prenuptial agreement's either necessary or they wouldn't want one. And so there's a couple of things here that I think uncertainty. Now, in my mind, a prenuptial agreement gives you more certainty, but if a couple doesn't disclose all of their assets or leave something out intentionally, then that prenuptial agreement might not be binding. But my counter to that is, if you're concerned that someone's not going to share all of that information or be completely upfront or hide some of their assets, why are you marrying them? Like that's already, there's a trust issue there.
Exactly.
So I don't know that I think that's a great one. We go back to the unromantic. This is another great quote along those lines. I love this one. It says, if, like most people, you're willing to do whatever it takes to ensure a lasting marriage, then yes, a prenuptial agreement is a good idea. So really, if it comes down to it, whatever it takes to have the best, healthiest marriage, and this is something that could be healthy.
Because you know what? Those of us coming in from a divorce that we weren't expecting, or a long marriage that ended with kids, and taking that step into marriage, that's pretty risky. It's tough. It's scary. And if there's something where you can come together, discuss what your future is going to hold financially, where things are going to end up if A, B, or C happen, whatever, what's going to happen if the individual continues staying in the home and the other one continues to work, whatever it is, that actually sets up your marriage for a peaceful marriage. Like, because you've already got it figured out. You already know the answers. And so, yes, I see why people kind of think that way, but it's opposite. It's just completely opposite.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a little story that's unrelated to this, but it is a whole question of security. When we hire new executives into my company, one of the first things we do is their orientation is give them a copy of our severance policy. Now that's a strange thing to do. Hey, we just hired you, but in case we fire you, here's what you get. But the reason we do that is to give them peace of mind that whatever happens, here's a sort of a safety net. And that's what I think, that peace of mind when you're doing your job because you know what'll happen. It's the same thing in a prenuptial agreement, is you have a peace of mind as to how you'll be treated if the worst things happen. And I don't see that there's any harm in that. I understand that people say, well, then you go into a relationship not really trusting, but I think this is something that helps to create more trust. So Corey, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, you can iron out the agreement to the point where you say, anytime we invest in a business together, we buy a house together, you can spell it out. Like, if I take money out of my account that I brought into the marriage to put down on the house, and then you take money out of your account and we put that in, then you have the agreement that says we get that money back and we split any appreciation of the property. So you can spell that out, so there's never hurt feelings like, well, I put in the majority of the money, or blah, 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 or I'm the one working and you're not, so I've been paying the mortgage. You don't have to have any of those arguments or any of those misunderstandings. It's just like a business. And like you said, Joyce, like, a lot of people get into marriages because of love, but people forget that 90% of the marriage is building a life together, and building a life together is assets, spending money on bills,
and disagreements and different ways of thinking about those things. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Who's going to pay for whose weddings? Like, what happens if we get in a marriage and then you're like, hey, my kid's going to college, can we help pay for college? Like, that should be spelled out before you ever get married, because personally, your kid, I've known your kid for 6 months. Why am I paying for his college?
Hey, I just want to talk one really quick on this, and then we'll get to your next one there, on this comment where it talks about how spousal support ends if you get remarried. So that shouldn't kind of come into play. I'm going to tell you the truth. Like, that is not always the case. In my case, that's not what happened. Like, I had a pre-designated set of time where I was getting alimony despite being married. And so, that's important for those of us who have that income coming in, that we know where that is going and where that's allocated, because it would be, like, if I was still getting alimony in the marriage and we were unsure where that would happen, if, where that went, when there was a divorce, that can become confusing. So just don't assume like that just because someone has alimony that it's going to end with marriage, because it can go forward depending on their court records. And so that is another way where a prenup can actually protect the person who is getting that support from their ex-spouse for the time that they dedicated in that marriage.
Right. So yeah, those, like, it comes down to facts and circumstances, because some that will be the case, some it won't. So you just have to understand for yourself kind of what that situation is.
Yeah.
So another reason people don't want to do a prenuptial agreement is because it's unbalanced. We talked a little bit about that already, but if one party is very, very wealthy and the other is not, there are mechanisms that you can put into place to be sure that there is some financial equality in the marriage. So I think that's important. Without a prenuptial agreement, if you have someone who's very, very wealthy and someone who's not, you're less protected than you might be if you have a good prenuptial agreement. So again, another understanding that truly there can be an imbalance. I had a conversation recently with someone, and we talked about the fact that, two people don't have to be exactly alike to be happy in a marriage. You don't have to say, hey, I can only marry someone who has a similar size nest egg as I do, or who has nothing like I do, or has a lot like I do. And so you can have a disparity in those things if you have a good agreement and understand how that relates to both of you. You don't have to have that complete equality to be happy, as long as you both can understand what the expectations are from each other. One other thing that we hear a lot is that they're unnecessary. Now, I think there's a little bit of truth to that, depending on what you want from a prenuptial agreement, because in this country, we sort of have two types of states or two types of laws around property in a divorce. One is community property. So in community property states, all the assets and the debts acquired during the marriage are considered joint property and are divided equally between the spouses in the event of a divorce. So you don't have, what am I thinking? You don't, you go into the situation knowing what you put into the marriage during the time of the marriage is split. You don't get a chance to sort of say, I want more of this, or they want more of this. And I imagine that there's still, in those states, there's still probably a lot of fighting, but it generally is about what is considered marital property. So Corey gave the example of someone who had a house and then the spouse put all the money into it. He put his money into the house, and so it became joint spousal property. And so that's why the courts decided it that way. And so that's, again, something you can address is, when is it considered joint property and when it's not? The states that have community property are Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. None of them that I live in. So,
and you'll know if you buy a house together, it will say at closing, the title will say joint community property or joint property. It'll actually say it in your title.
Yeah. Yep. So that's good to know. But I think the caution there is then, when you bring money into the marriage, how you use that, like if you use it together, you have to recognize that that's part of your, in community property states, they're just going to split it. The other states have something that's really called equitable distribution. And that means that the courts would divide the marital assets in a manner that is fair, but not necessarily equal. And that becomes really challenging, because the court is who gets to decide what's fair and what's not.
And then that's pricey. I mean, anytime you have to go to an attorney and go to a court and fight over assets and fight over whatever, like that is just money flying out the window. Yeah. And that's
it
why
goes right to the attorneys. If you have if you have $100,000 in the bank, now I'm not disparaging people who are attorneys, but there are some unscrupulous, there are some people that are not very honorable lawyers,
yes,
and they will milk it, and they will milk it, and they know your assets because they're asking you, like, I need to get all your assets before so I know how we divide this. And they're like, ooh, this guy's got only $20,000 in the bank. Let's see how I can stretch that out to where I can finalize this divorce at $19,950.
Right.
Yep. And that's what I'm saying. If you go into court, you're going to be paying a whole bunch. So
Yep.
You can do a prenup through an attorney, but there's lots of other different online sources you can do a prenuptial agreement through, which is a lot lower cost than battling it out.
Right.
If divorce comes.
Right.
I use LegalZoom for my partnerships and my LLCs, and it's so easy. They have templates and you just fill it in. You can put in paragraphs about whatever you want. It could be the thing about, like, when I went to business school, the thing about agreements is that you could put anything in there. You could talk about, like, when I die or when this partnership breaks up, we have to have a party at Chuck E. Cheese. Like, you could put that in there and you have to live up to that agreement. I mean, you could put anything you want. So
yeah. Well, and back to this whole unnecessary, I think it's important to note that probably of all of the reasons we talked about so far, unnecessary for me holds the most water, because in truth, we have this fear. I think sometimes you go into a marriage with all these assets, you've spent your life earning all of this money, and you're afraid that you're going to go into a marriage and all of that money is going to be subject to somebody else getting half of it. And that is not the way that it's going to work. Because if you're bringing those assets into the marriage and you had them before the marriage, those aren't considered marital assets. It is the things that you earn and that you commingle while you're in that marriage relationship. So in other words, if you come into a marriage with $100,000 that you had prior to that, during the marriage you earn $20,000, that's the $20,000 that's going to be subject to splitting, not the whole amount. And so I think that there is this fearfulness that if you don't have this prenuptial agreement, then you're going to be subject to these really unfair, but in truth, you probably aren't, because under the law, that's how you're going to be treated. But sometimes you want to be able to say, maybe someone wants to say, hey, I do think my spouse should be entitled to some other things, or you want to be very clear. You both, have assets or don't have assets, and you want to be able to make that decision for yourself. I think that's really important. But I also think it's really important for people to know, going into a marriage, that if you feel like you're going to marry someone who's wealthy and you end up being married 5 or 6 years, that you're just going to get half of everything they own, that's not going to happen.
Probably not.
No, it's not. And so, and there could be some extenuating circumstances. Again, in those equitable distribution states, judges may say, hey, because of what you've suffered in this marriage, you may be entitled to more. But I think it's really important to think about what your expectations are and to understand the law around it in your state, and then to be able to talk about that. I mean, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I love what Dave's saying right here. Like this hit the nail right on the head, right? If you can't approach this discussion with the person you're supposed to live out this life with and into eternity and love forever without them trying to shaft you, then you're probably in the wrong relationship, and it's probably not who you need to marry anyway. So it's a tough combo, but it's like a window into the future. You can go into the conversation.
What's interesting. It's totally interesting about what you said about that, because the thing though about not having something like written out, like, okay, so say something bad happens, like not having it written out, it puts your assets at risk, like you said, about when it goes to battle. Because I remember when I was going through my divorce, I was in California, right? California is a community property state. It's also a no-fault divorce state. So they don't care. They don't care about anything except for splitting up the assets 50-50. And I remember I had to sit my spouse down and I said, look, if you want to fight tooth and nail about everything, I showed her the bank accounts and I said, we're going to give the attorneys all of this money. And you know what's going to happen? Because we're in a community property state and it's a no-fault divorce state. They don't give a crap. You're going to get 50% and I'm going to get 50%. But if you want to fight over 1 or 2 or 5%, you're going to give all of this cash to the attorneys.
Yep.
And once she realized, like, this is the way it is, luckily for me, she was reasonable enough to look at that and go, I don't want to give the attorneys, $30,000 out of our bank account. So she was reasonable about it. But there are people who are very emotional and unreasonable, and they could just be like, I don't care. In fact, I'd rather you not get any of that cash. I'd rather I burn this whole thing to the ground. And that there are people that are like that. And so you can sit there and go, man, I'm in financial ruin because of this divorce, because this person was unreasonable, emotional, and wanted revenge. And so having a prenup could protect you from those unreasonable, emotional revenge divorces.
Yep.
And again, this is a great point that Val's pointing out, is that sometimes it brings peace to a combining family. If you're blending a family with some adult children and they're like, is this person going to take, what should be mine or whatever, there's a lot of emotions that come into this stuff. And I think that a prenup can set everyone's mind at ease and allow things to move forward smoothly.
Agree. Well, and for me personally, I don't have children, and I would want, if I was marrying someone who had children, I'd want their children to know I'm not in it to take what their dad has. But likewise, and this is more from my perspective, this is more in the case of death, but if I were to be married for 2 years and I were to, be hit by a train or whatever, and only having been married for 2 years, to have everything I worked my whole life for go to person I'd been married to, I'd known for 2, maybe 3 years. When my family has been there with me I would want them to know he's not interested in taking all of my stuff.
Right, exactly.
And so for me, it is that same peace of mind that, the families on both sides know that we really want to be married because we love each other, not because either of us is looking out to get, the assets that the other person has. I think that's a really important thing. A couple of quick points. Another reason people don't like the idea of a prenup, and I don't know that this holds a lot of water because it's a limitation, but I just don't know that it's something that most people would be trying to do in a prenup, but it can't include child support or custody matters. So the courts would decide those. So you can't say, well, if we get married and we have kids and then we divorce, then I get custody. You can't have any of that stuff in there. So it is limited. It doesn't cover every single thing, but I think it covers enough things to make it worth it. And then it can't be all encompassing. That sort of is the last one. It can't be all encompassing because you don't know every single thing that might happen. You don't know what, would happen if one of you gets really ill and is not able to earn money. Like, how are you going to address that? You might talk about it in there, but there's always going to be a circumstance that isn't anticipated. So it can't be all encompassing. But, from my perspective, when I think about it, I think there's more benefit than harm. And again, I think the biggest concern people have is it feels like a lack of trust.
Yep.
Or it feels like, I want a prenup because I believe we're going to get divorced. And I think we need to get that kind of out of our heads and recognize whether we have a prenup or not, talking about one, confronting the issues that one would present, I think is a really important thing to do.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. Do you buy life insurance? Do you ignore buying life insurance because that might predict death? Like, oh, he might die. Well, yeah, it's going to happen. It could happen tomorrow and it could happen 80 years from now. But you buy life insurance because things do go wrong in life. So why not have a prenup as like an insurance policy, Right.
Because I think when we think about life insurance, we don't want to believe it's going to happen, right? We say to ourselves, is it smart to say to ourselves, well, I don't want to think about that. If I think about the fact that I might die, like I'm putting doubt out in the world. And so therefore I just won't buy life insurance. I mean, that's not wise. And so it's not that different from saying, I want to think about what could potentially happen and what would I do in the case of that. It doesn't make it any more likely to happen. I think it makes it less likely to happen.
I think it makes it less likely as well, because again, it removes that question mark in your head. It removes the, is this person really wanting to get married for the right reasons? Because honestly, again, a majority of us in the LDS singles realm at the age we're at have been burned, either through a marriage or through engagements going south, all the broken breakups with boyfriends and girlfriends, whatever. Like, we know that this is an up and down game. It's a roller coaster ride. And just because you get married and you say, I do, doesn't mean that the ride's done. Like, you're still on that roller coaster. Hopefully you know, steer clear from the divorces, but you don't know. Like, it's not guaranteed. And so I know that this is an uncomfortable conversation. And I honestly think if you were to sit down maybe with some of your friends and who were married at a very young age and they didn't have a need for a prenup because they had nothing, you might get judged. You know, you might get some people looking at you like, what are you doing? Do you not trust him? Do you not, if you don't trust him, you shouldn't be marrying him, you know, that kind of stuff.
Well, we're in different stages. Like, I got married at 22. I had nothing. My wife had nothing. Like, when we started out, we rented a room from a senior citizen lady. That was our first place. That was our first shelter. We rented a bedroom, and everything we built for 22 years, I had no problem. I didn't fight her on everything, on anything. I'm like, hey, we had 2 properties. You take one, I'll take the other. I'll take the higher payment one since I make more money. You take the lower payment one. They both had the same equity. We split up the bank accounts. I gave her the nicer car. I took the car that my kids had in high school. Like, we just split things up, and we were very amicable about it. But that was California law. Like, are we going to have the attorney split everything up and take all the fees? Or are we just going to sit down and iron this out? So we did a stipulated agreement. We put everything on paper. We signed it, and that was it. It was very amicable. But we built our lives together from nothing. Now I'm older. I've acquired retirements, and I have a pension. I'm going to be eligible to retire, in a few years. And like, do I want to get into like a marriage with 80% chance of divorce and have all the stuff that I built up, all the stuff that I've recovered from my divorce, and just have it all go poof because, I'm not proving my love to the person I'm getting married? It doesn't make sense.
Well, I have a cute story. I was having this conversation. My little nephew, he's right now, he's serving a mission in Tegucigalpa in Honduras. And so we were having this conversation. It was actually while he was sort of between. He was a COVID missionary, and he came home part of the way through his mission, and now he's back out finishing it up. But we were talking about, we were just having a conversation, and I was telling him my thoughts on a prenup, and he said, I don't know. I guess I'll have to think about whether I should get a prenup. And I thought, oh my gosh, you sweet boy, you have nothing. She will have nothing.
There's nothing to prenup unless, you know what? Okay, but let me throw something out there, because I got married super young. We had like nothing to go to go off of. But you know what? I spent 25 years of my life raising children. I spent it in the home, managing the home and all the aspects of being a stay-at-home mom. Now, was I earning income? Absolutely not. I don't know. I kind of feel like maybe that could have been something, if you're in the home. Now, luckily, my ex saw the value I had and saw the investment I put into our family, and definitely went above and beyond what the state required of him. Now, do I think he went above and beyond what God required of him? Absolutely not. I think Heavenly Father saw my value. I think he knows what I invested. And I think he knows that without me in the home doing what I was doing, my ex couldn't travel around and get all of the different promotions that he received. So, maybe in the beginning, a prenup as to say, you know what, you're in the home for all the years you're in. If you choose to take that route, we chose to be, I'm a stay-at-home mom, he's the provider. That was what we agreed to. So maybe that is something that you can prenup, but it's not like it's more of we got something now bringing it into the marriage. It's like, I got my used pots and pans from my mom, and I got to get those at the end of the, we don't have anything other than future and current. Like I was reading on there that online that they're saying that in the prenups, you can even have specifications like each spouse has to put a certain amount of money in savings, and you're like, just like, hey, we're both investing here. We're both doing these things. And so
it can be retirement, like joint retirement account.
Yeah.
You could say, hey, for the next, we're getting married now kind of in our senior years. So like, here's what we have to plan for retirement. We're going to save X amount of dollars per month. We're going to put into an IRA. You could do a lot of stuff like that.
Agreed.
So think of it as a business like transaction. I keep bringing that up, but you would never start a business with a business partner and not put things down on paper, because then when you guys argue about the business, like who gets what and oh, the business is doing terrible, or the business is a huge success, or hey, I want to go start my own business, I want to be a competitor. Like, boy, that would suck. And you didn't have written down that that person couldn't compete against you. Like, they couldn't take all of your knowledge and your clients and go start another business. Like, you have to write that stuff down to protect yourself. But everybody says, well, that you would be a very good friend or business partner if you didn't have a business agreement. Why not have like something written down about a relationship that says, hey, we're going to save for retirement. What if somebody says, I really believe in vacations and they're important to me, so we're going to save for, and we're going to do an annual vacation every year, and that's going to be in the prenup. Everybody thinks that prenups is this angry document that says, hey, we're getting a divorce and here's what's going to happen. You can spell out all kinds of positive things in the prenup.
Yeah, and then you know what your role is. You know that you're protected, whatever it is you're doing. This is an interesting comment that Timothy has. He says that he thinks a prenup opens the door for greed for money. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of people may view it that way. I think a lot of people see that as, if you want a prenup, it's because you don't want to share what you have with someone else. But one of the things I was going to say is I think it's really important, if you are marrying someone with a lot more financially that they bring to the table, and they're asking for a prenup, then you need to know your value and what you bring to the table and have that conversation. Because I do think it's really important that you get what you need included in that. And it may not be the financial, you can't go and say, I want all of what you earned before I met you. But I think you should be able to say, here's what I bring to the table. Here's what I will need. Here are the things that I want to see us do in our life together. And I think it's good to include that.
Absolutely. And I love this comment from Heather. And I think we've touched on it a couple times, but in one of my marriage and family classes, one of the authors of the books that we were learning out of, he had said, when him and his wife they were on a second marriage, both of them. And when they entered into that marriage, they set aside everything they were bringing for each of their sets of kids. And it wasn't even considered like as a communal thing. And then once they got together, they then built what they had for their future kids, because they had kids together, and moving forward. And I think that's such a smart way to go about it. If you come in and because especially if you've been married a really long time, I need to make sure, and Corey needs to make sure, like, his kids are prepared, taken care of, even if a new spouse comes into the picture. And I think that that's a logical, not greedy way of looking at things. It's just, we in this country focus too much on love. Granted, we do want to love our spouse. I get that. But we romanticize marriage. Almost every other nation that's like not, like the US, it's about, what does it bring to our family? What does it bring to us financially?
Yeah. The dowries, like, nobody talks about the dowries anymore.
Yes.
The reason why a man buys a expensive ring for a woman is because he says, I value you, but if this goes bad, I've given you, it's almost like a dowry. So rings have replaced dowries. But before a woman was ever given to a man for marriage in the old days, they were like, what are you going to do to protect her? And they had to put up a dowry. So if that man decided to kick her to the curb or decided to run off with another woman, well, she's got a bag of gold that the guy put up as a dowry for her. I mean, but nobody does it anymore today.
Yeah, no, it's all about, it's because in the early 1900s, everyone's like, oh, I'm in love, and so I'm going to get married, because love wins all, right? Like, love, you can get through anything if you love somebody. That's actually just, it's just not the truth. And so we got these fairy tale, I don't care if he's living in the streets and has no education and no aspirations. I love him and I'm going to marry him.
Then you have to realize, where's the food coming from?
Yeah.
And who's paying the electric bill, because you know what? It's really hot outside and the air conditioner is not working. Like, the reality sets in. I mean, love is great. But when you say you're going to commit, I mean, you can fall in love with anybody, but when you say, I'm going to commit to you, and I'm going to do it on a legal document so that we can live together and live in the same roof, under the same roof, you have to think to yourself, like, that entails money. You have to buy food. You have to pay for insurance. You have to pay for rent or a mortgage. You have to pay for gas in the car. Like, it's not, love's not going to do that stuff.
Yeah.
What's going to do that stuff is assets and money. And so you have to iron that stuff out.
Yeah. And I think I think that if you have that conversation, you may learn so many things about your potential spouse, just their attitude toward money. I was talking to a friend who was saying that when he's dating someone, he sort of gets the sense that she sort of expects that she's going to just stay at home and eat bonbons, and he's going to be the breadwinner and so on. That sort of turns him off. And I said, yeah, but if you don't talk about those things, how do you know them? Well, I can tell. Well, can you? Do you always know that? Like, sometimes, again, we've talked many times about narcissists who hide a lot of things for a long time. And if you're with someone who has certain expectations, they don't just tell you. They might have a great job, but once you're married, they might say, okay, I'm done. I don't need to work anymore. And that might be okay with you, but until you've talked about it. So, like, my goal in having this conversation about prenups, because I see all the stuff that is on the Facebook pages where people are talking about it, comes up every once in a while, and you've got two camps, very clear two camps. And I think I would like for those people who like, no way, I'm not getting a prenup, to sort of think about it differently and think about, okay, this is not just him saying, hey, I don't want you to take my money if we get divorced. I think it really is about making sure that you both understand each other, what you want, what you expect, what you bring to the table. And then if you've had that conversation, maybe a prenup makes sense, maybe it doesn't, but have that conversation. That's the most important thing. Talk about it and then decide, does it help you to have a prenup? And I think many times it will.
Absolutely. And I just like what Dave was saying there. Like, even if we just retitle it, people would calm down.
Yeah.
If you just write out, hey, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about our finances, we're going to talk about the what ifs in life, we're going to talk about what you're bringing in, what I'm bringing in, what expectations we might have of each other, and what plans we have for our children. If we sat down and had that conversation, all right, let's do this.
Yeah.
If
I know so many people
gets a little,
But we're also forgetting that this is a short word for prenuptial, which means pre-marriage,
right?
Prenuptual agreement.
Yep.
Like, you're just having an agreement. And so everybody's like, yeah, let's have the agreement. Let's not document it. Let's talk about it. And let's just cross our fingers that you're not going to turn into a jerk, or I'm not going to catch you, in front of a computer with porn, or I'm not going to catch you sleeping with the secretary. Like, you're just going to cross your fingers and think everything's going to be okay because we had a wonderful conversation and we didn't write down the agreement. We did not write it down that this was what's going to happen. I mean,
and I agree.
If a woman got burned if a person got burned in cheating, or a person got burned with pornography, why not put that in the agreement? If I catch you with pornography, here's the ramifications.
Here's the issue. Yeah. And I totally think you can do that. I think it can be used in a lot of positive ways, as we've stated. I do believe I like what Nellie's saying here, that, a lot of people do jump into marriages without prayer. I think that if you were to sit down with someone you were going to plan on marrying, and prayed and pondered on this, I think the Lord would help you realize, like, this will bring your mind ease. It will bring you some peace in knowing, hey, we've sat down. It's kind of a goal. Here we go. Here's our goals. We've got different paths in case different things happen. Some of the paths we hope don't happen now, but things such as, hey, we each put money in each month in the savings, and we go on a weekly, a yearly vacay, whatever it is. It can bring a good calm to your life if used correctly. Now, if you're someone who has a whole bunch of money and you're marrying someone with nothing, and you're like, you don't get a penny of my stuff no matter how long we're married, okay, that's when that's when it becomes stingy and greedy, and it'll probably get thrown out in court anyway. But anyway, thank you, Joyce, for gathering all that stuff and sharing it with us. Thank you so much for the live chat. That was awesome. There's so much going on in there.
It was great chat. I couldn't keep up with it because I was trying to keep up with my banners. So I couldn't keep up with it, but it was good chat. Yeah.
Yes, good chat. And sadly, we didn't get to get into the financial part of the, financial recovery, but we're going to do it. Next week, we have LDR. So we have Heidi and David coming on. David's feeling better now, so he's going to be hopping on, and we're going to talk about long distance relationships. The following week after that, we'll do part 2 of this, and we'll do the recovery after divorce financially. So thank you guys for all joining us. We do have the after party. Joyce, after party?
Yep. I will put in the comments. Copy it. Yep. I will copy it. It's here. Let me copy it into it. Yeah. So yeah, join our, we would love to have folks join us on our Zoom link. Here's the link. There you go. So just, we usually join about 3 or 4 minutes late just because we have to wrap up.
We have a little powwow after, and then we join you there. But so all are invited to come hang out with us on Zoom for about a half hour, and we just chit chat about just stuff. So anyway, thank you again, Joyce and Corey, for joining me today. And thank you everyone for coming. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Bye.